thank you all for joining us today. We wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about a topic that's of increasing importance these days, it seems like, always importance, and that's the idea of collaboration and the power of community. And we know how busy you are, as Cary indicated, at the best of times. These are very far from the best of times, it seems like. So we appreciate you making some time in your day to join us and be a part of this conversation. My name is Cary Brown. I'm the Director of Higher Education Programs here at IMS Global Learning Consortium. And joining me is Kelly Hoyland, who is our Institutional Program Manager of Higher Education Programs here at IMS Global Learning Consortium, or as most folks probably know it, IMS Global, or even just IMS, tends to get shortened because it's a bit of a mouthful. But that also begs the question always, what does IMS stand for? And for a disturbingly long time, my answer was, I don't know. But I do know now. It stands for Instructional Management System, which is an archaic way of referring to what we now generally call learning management systems, which tells you a little bit about how long IMS has been around. We've been around for over 20 years now, I think about 22 altogether. We came originally out of EDUCAUSE as a special interest group. But despite those origins, IMS these days actually covers K-12, higher education, corporate learning increasingly, as those lines between higher education and corporate and employment and continuing education all blur, governmental bodies and providers in the edtech solution space. So it really is one of the, I would say, one of the real unique aspects of IMS, that it actually provides that forum for all of the institutional and district members to come together in collaboration with the supplier community to work on problems and devise solutions to advance learning and the digital ecosystem and advance the cause of learning technology. So that's one of the things that IMS does very, very well and continues to do, has continued to do over the years. We've grown very significantly since our origins. We now are, I believe, at over 576 or 77 members as of today. And that includes more than 100 higher education institutions, kind of running the gamut, running the spectrum from large state systems to community colleges to small liberal arts schools, as well as educational associations. And then, like I said, close to 400 educational technology solution providers that really span the globe. It really is IMS Global. We have a large and growing presence in Europe. We have a number of institutions and providers in Japan and Korea, and really truly all over the world, with more than, closing in now on 7,000 actual individual member participants. So a very, very broad, very comprehensive community, really all working toward that same goal. And that goal is the use of technology to advance learning, to make learning more scalable, to improve student outcomes and student engagement. When we think about that digital transformation that IMS focuses on and that the IMS community is dedicated to, we like to think of it really as sort of a continuum or a process where we can think about sort of the foundational pieces where you're building out the bones, you're building out the framework of your digital ecosystems on campus and really laying that foundation. And once you have that foundation in place, then really thinking about what are the solutions that you can put in place that are really going to advance the critical mission of teaching and learning on your campus. So that includes equity and access and learner agency. And as you get that piece into play, as you really start to build out a digital ecosystem that is serving all of your students and your instructors' needs, how do we start to recognize the achievement that's coming out of that learning? And how do we do that in ways that are representative of a lot of the new learning modalities and outcomes that are occurring in higher education these days? Because we all know that world is changing very, very quickly, and that pace of change is only increasing at this point. So, kind of using that as a framework, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work that IMS does. For example, probably most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with LTI, with Learning Tools Interoperability. Um, when I first joined IMS, I would talk to institutions or even providers, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, you're the LTI folks." But what struck me was how frequently I had conversations where people thought that was all IMS provided. That's all we did was LTI. And in fact, while it's an important part of what IMS does, it's one very small piece of what is an increasingly large puzzle of work that IMS does. And so we wanted to take just a little bit of time to touch base on a number of things, and then we'll delve into some of those a little bit more just so you have some information. One of the things that really is part of that foundation of how you think about starting to build out your digital ecosystem is something that is fairly unique to IMS in the education technology space, and that is IMS doesn't just work with the community to, among other things, define specifications and standards, but we actually require certification around those standards. Again, probably thinking of LTI, you've probably had lots of conversations where you've talked to a supplier who said, "Oh yeah, we're compliant with LTI, or we're conformant with LTI. We built to LTI. We can use LTI." That's different than certification. As part of its process of ensuring rigor in integration and interoperability, IMS and the community not only builds out the standards and defines the specifications, but we've built out conformance test suites so that anybody implementing those standards can actually test against that conformance suite and ensure and certify that they've implemented correctly. So if you have a problem with a supplier that is an IMS certified integration, IMS certified solution, IMS stands behind that, and we'll work with you and we'll work with the suppliers to ensure that we resolve whatever that discrepancy may be. So that's a really important consideration as you think about how are you building out your interoperable digital ecosystem in a way that provides you with confidence that it's actually going to work. And the IMS product directory lists all of the products that are currently IMS certified. That's out there on the IMS website that you can find if you go out there. And it right now is thousands of products. And you can do filters and you can do searches and find the things that you're looking for. So as you're building out that ecosystem, that's an important kind of first step to think about, am I looking at products that are good actors within the digital ecosystem and that are dedicated to ensuring the highest degree of interoperability? Kind of a corollary or corresponding piece to that, also available through the product directory for IMS members, is our Trusted Apps program. And this is something we just rolled out here relatively recently, really in the last year in a meaningful way. And this is, again, part of that equation is as you think about the solutions that you're bringing into your digital ecosystem, how do they deal with data privacy? We know that's a really, really critical part of the consideration that you have to give as you look at new learning tools and learning applications that you're bringing in. What is the culture of privacy at those companies and within those solutions? Do they have a published privacy statement, and how well do the elements of that privacy statement align with the expectations of the industry and with higher education? So there, in fact, is a rubric that was developed by IMS community members that can be scored against these solutions that tells you what do they, what does their policy state they do with data when it comes to marketing? Do they exchange personally identifiable information, which may be perfectly valid for the solution that you're talking about, but you need to know that. So the Trusted Ed Apps is another way that you build out that foundation as you think about the initiation of your digital ecosystem and moving that digital ecosystem forward. Once you have those pieces in place, you can start to think about then what are the next steps that are actually going to enable me, like we said, to enhance learning, to actually forward the teaching and learning element of the digital ecosystem. We talked about LTI a little bit. LTI Advantage is the most recent offering within LTI. It builds on top of the core LTI capabilities to actually encompass not only a new security framework, but a range of services that are additive to and extend the core LTI capability. For example, around the passing of name and rostering information in ways that is much more robust and much more proactive than previous capabilities within older versions of LTI. Another good example is the deep resourcing linking. So previously, if you were trying to link out to a piece of digital content from your learning platform, for example, you kind of had to drop people at the front door of that and then allow them to navigate into the particular content they were trying to reach. Deep linking actually allows you to provide a link directly to that content, but it still does it within the context of a secure single sign-on capability that LTI provides. So lots of new things coming out in LTI Advantage that have extended its capabilities and extended its usefulness. The other advantage of LTI Advantage, no pun intended, is that, maybe a little bit of pun intended, is that it allows us to continue to add new services without necessarily affecting the core LTI capabilities or having to make any changes there. A very good example of that in the current context of reaction to the pandemic is the new LTI proctoring service. Proctoring as a practice was heavily impacted by the closure of in-person teaching and gatherings, and all of that had to go to digital delivery the way so much of our teaching and learning did. Well, the IMS community very quickly came together to pull together the LTI proctoring service, which allows for the launching of those proctoring solutions, again, in that secure and knowledgeable fashion, passing the information that you need to pass, passing no more than you need to pass in a single sign-on situation. So that's a very good example. It was a very good example of how the IMS community and how standards were able to allow institutions to very quickly pivot to address new needs that came up unexpectedly. And I think it's fair to say this last year came up rather unexpectedly for most of us. Another good example of the use of standards to be proactively reactive to that sort of situation is learning analytics. Learning analytics have been a topic for many years now, kind of a promise that we've been trying to fulfill as an industry for a while, and we've been making progress. But with the advent of the heavy, almost complete reliance on digital platforms to deliver learning and deliver content, one of the things that came up was suddenly there was a need to understand not kind of the larger, more philosophical, if you will, learning analytics type questions and how they might apply to learning engineering and adaptive learning and things like that, but very, very basic questions around student engagement, for example. Are the students that used to come to my class in person, are they logging in? Are they engaging with the material? If they're not, why not? Caliper Analytics is a specification from IMS that allows for the capture of all sorts of learning information and learning events, whether it's a tool launch and tool usage type or activity within learning tools and learning platforms at a very granular level, using a common syntax and a common vocabulary so that you can very quickly and very robustly build out this analytics ecosystem on campus and capture as event streams all of this learning information. And we've had feedback from some of our institutional members that said having these analytics ecosystems in place allowed them, for example, to quickly identify whole populations or demographics that were no longer engaging at the levels that they were prior to the pandemic, and actually mobilizing human resources to go out and talk to those students and find out why, finding out things like they didn't have reliable internet access at home, or they didn't have hardware. They were actually relying on the use of computers at the library, for example, and really highlighting issues, for example, of equity and access. So that's a great way of kind of building out that learning environment further and further. And those are only a few examples that we have listed here. And a few of the ways that you can think about building out and enhancing those learning capabilities. But then the question begins to arise naturally enough. How do I actually represent the achievement and the assessments that are coming out of the digital learning environment in a meaningful way and in a way that is representative of those types of learning? We're all very familiar, of course, with a traditional transcript, but how do you represent non-curricular activity and co-curricular activity, experiential activity, and experiential learning and competencies and competency-based learning? Because those are all really, really important and increasingly relevant assessment aspects that are being looked at not only at the institutional level, but at the employer level as well. So you begin to see the introduction of things like the comprehensive learner record. The CLR is a relatively new specification out of IMS that allows you to represent that kind of non-traditional learning, the co-curricular learning, competencies, et cetera, and to do so in a secure and verifiable way that's portable, not only, for example, from the institution to the student, but from institution to institution, from institution to the employer, which again, those boundaries and the need to exchange information between institutions and the workplace are increasingly important. And the CLR plays a really critical role as we think about the evolution of that space, to the point where ACRO, the registrar's organization, has not only endorsed the CLR, but has actually indicated that if your institution is going to try to implement some sort of extended transcript that incorporates things like co-curricular, non-curricular activity, et cetera, that the CLR is the mechanism by which you should do that, so that there is a robust, consistent, portable way to represent that information. And that ties directly into all sorts of other digital credential information, including badging and the open badges standard, which IMS currently manages, which allows you to represent those digital credentials and to do so in a way that's portable between those credential platforms. That's all, kind of stuff that's in play right now. But the reality is, again, this year has been a great example of knowing that, or understanding that time doesn't stand still, and there are always new solutions that are coming out that need to be addressed, new issues that need to be addressed. We have a number of our projects that are looking forward in that fashion. One, for example, is Edu API, which is all about unlocking all of that wealth of information that is in the student information system, exposing that to the broader digital ecosystem, not only for things like rostering and provisioning, but getting that information, that highly important contextualizing information, out into learning record stores for analytic purposes, or integrating with things like CRMs, which increasingly are being used at your institutions, not only for communication and marketing purposes, but as solutions for recruiting and admissions. And so as students matriculate or enter the university, getting that information from the CRM over into the SIS and ensuring that that information flows back and forth. Another good example, going back to the trusted app solution that we were talking about earlier, is, we kind of talked about data privacy and security and things like that. One of the other aspects that's become very, very heightened in the current situation is questions about accessibility of your digital solutions, whether it's digital tools or content. And IMS is currently undertaking the development of a rubric that will play into the Trusted App solution, which allows an assessment of solutions, again, around that culture of accessibility at a solution, not necessarily how well they actually conform to, for example, WCAG 2.0, but do they claim to conform to WCAG 2.0? Do they have stated accessibility policies? Do they have dedicated points of contact or development teams around accessibility? The kind of baseline questions that will help you understand the nature of the tools and how those tools are approached and whether they're going to be a right fit for your campus. So a lot of activity in a lot of different areas occurring at IMS, and that activity just keeps going forward and forward. But I wanted to be sure, I'm going to stop there, even though there's a lot more we could cover, because I want to be sure that you're actually hearing from your colleagues about their perception of the value of standards and the value of community when it comes to standards. So going to have a word here from Vernon Smith.
Hello, I'm Dr. Vernon Smith. I'm provost of the American Public University System. That's comprised of American Military University and American Public University. We're a 100% online institution, primarily serving our military service and military affiliated folks. What I'd like to talk about is the benefit of having standards. You know, if there's something I would relate, especially in a role as a provost, I would say, keep it simple, use standards, right? The KISS principle, but keep it simple, use standards. Complexity can add to cost, time, it raises risk. And by having standards, you actually prevent and prepare, you buffer yourself against those complexities, the ambiguities that can really cause problems for not only implementing technologies, but also the processes and the systems around it. At American Public University System, we find that having standards such as LTI saves us time, effort, as well as helping us to know that we are in good company, we're part of the community, and we know that those standards not only help us level set for what quality is, but it also for the future assures that that standard of quality will continue. And that's the power of standards. We are happy to be affiliated with IMS. Why? Because it's instantaneous access to some of the best experts, the best thinking that's going on in technology, in higher education, and education in general. Some really innovative ideas are there. And before we look at going down a path, we know that we have a great source and we have others that are part of this that we can consult with. And if there's a great idea that we have, we can also check out and see, has someone already thought of this or is someone already working on this? And I'll tell you, 9 times out of 10, if you come to IMS and are part of that, you'll see that someone has been down this road and there's been lessons learned, mistakes made, but also successes that have been shared and are available to you as an institution. Also, you're not in this alone in that community. You're with others that have similar needs, similar institutions, similar challenges that are there. And there's a lot of benefit to being part of a community of experts, a community of practice, and a community that's really trying to fulfill its mission and trying to do the best we can to transform students' lives, right, through the efforts that we do. And that's a big part of this.
As we think about the value of standards and how we think about the value proposition of the work that the IMS community does, we can really break it down into 3 different areas. One of those being the idea of de-risk. And to talk a little bit about that, I actually want to turn it over to Kelly.
Thanks, Cary. Yeah, I think as we think about standards and how they really can impact our institutional members, it's important to think about what are the big challenges for institutions, and risk is a high one. So being able to look at solutions and figure out what's a way to not eliminate risk, but really lower that barrier and making sure that we're set up for multiple options and being able to address things as they come. You can create that foundation that enables your institution to pivot or add new tools as needed to respond to changing needs. This year alone has been a lot of changing needs, but if you really have that foundation in place that allows you to add tools if your teaching and learning needs change or adjust, have some innovative projects that need to be able to be connected to the larger ecosystem, responding to um, institutional needs, I'm sure have adjusted over the last 12 months and will continue to do so in the future, as well as just different innovations of the products you're using. Having that foundation allows you to have some flexibility. So I like to think about this as when you think about your house, you have a standard electrical outlet. It doesn't matter what you plug into it, whether it's a refrigerator or a lamp or a TV, you can plug in what you need to plug in at that point without tearing down a wall and rewiring your house. So these standards really allow you to have that foundation to be able to, okay, we're ready to switch to a different solution, or we need to add a new solution. To be able to just plug that new tool into your environment is really, I think, a way to reduce that risk level. I'm sure institutions all have stories about times where they were working with a solution provider and needed to change for one reason or another. Being able to have that foundation where you simply take one solution out, put one in, and then you can choose that new solution really on what that solution offers you. What are the features that that solution can provide to you that the other ones can't, instead of worrying about how am I going to connect this to my system. This was crucial. We heard from our members as they responded to the rapid switch to remote teaching and learning that has happened this year. Numerous members had said IMS was the glue or the ticket or the solution to make all of that changing happen quickly, be able to pivot with all their faculty and staff so that they didn't have to focus on the technology as much as just working on what the students and faculty needed. They could focus their energy in that area instead of in the IT side. As Cary mentioned, proctoring has become a hot topic in the last year. So we really looked at how can we support that environment? If that's a solution that your institution wants to do, how can we make it the best experience for your students and your instructors? So looking at that proctoring solution to make the user experience of having to launch a proctoring tool really seamless and easy to do, one less barrier, one less step for students. And then as well, as Carrie had mentioned earlier, was that app vetting, that trusted apps work. Really to look at, instead of having every institution have to ask the same 5 questions or 10 questions that you have to ask to say, is this a tool we'll consider? Let's use the power of the community to say, let's ask this once so that we don't all have to repeat that work. So really looking at, okay, what are our minimum requirements for data privacy for our students? And let's see what's already out there. Oh, here's 3 tools that we're looking at. This one looks way better in data privacy standards, so let's start there and save ourselves some work. So those are some examples of ways institutions are really reducing their risk level as they use those standards. But to hear it from one of your colleagues, we'll hear now from Jennifer Sparrow.
So glad to be a part of the conversation here today with IMS Global and how Penn State has benefited from the LTI standards that IMS has collaboratively developed with both our vendors and our institutions. And I'll talk a little bit about 2 things here with the LTI integrations. The first of which is how LTI has lowered our risk from a security profile within Canvas, which is our LMS, but obviously with these standards, it's within any LMS that you're using. And the second thing is really thinking about the value to Penn State and the efficiencies that LTI integration adds, and how IMS has listened to both us, the institutions, and worked with the vendors to push them to that next level of integration certification. So the first piece of this is really about lowering our risk from a security perspective. And when we look at the ecosystem that we have within Canvas, obviously there's lots of additional tools that our faculty and students would love for us to add. We at Penn State have taken the posture that first and foremost, any vendors that are partners that are integrated within the LMS must have that LTI certification, because that allows us to give some assurances to our security office, to our privacy office, that our student and faculty data is going to be secure, and we don't have to go in and do that check on our own. And we know that the way that the vendors are accessing the information within the LTI and within the LMS is secure in a way that we may not be able to fully assess without that LTI integration. And so first and foremost, it's about keeping our student data secure, and having IMS Global as a partner in this and pushing our vendors to get to LTI integration. We know that there's sort of a stamp of approval that allows our, our folks on the security privacy end of things, our FERPA officer, some assurances that we don't have to worry about that for each of our individual vendors. The second piece, this is really about the value of the certification and the efficiencies that it allows. So as we think about the process by which we integrate, we get courseware for approval, and how we integrate it within the LMS, having to go back and do individual checks, having to have a back and forth with each of our vendor partners is both time consuming and resource consuming. And obviously we're critically faced with looking at how we better utilize our resources given these unique times and given what we know the impending future of our budgets are going to be. We want that assurance without having to duplicate effort over each of our institutions. One of the things that I would also like to add that has been critical as we start to move forward with working with our vendor partners and who we include in the LMS and how we include those is access to our data in a standard format. And I think this has been critical for us both in our partnership with IMS, but certainly in our partnership with the Unison Consortium. And so how our vendors provide the data back to us so that we can ingest that into a usable format as we start to make decisions for both efficacy of our tools, how our students are utilizing and leveraging those, and the impact that those have on student success and time to degree. And so that, to me, is really sort of the bigger outcome of this as we think about LTI integration. It's not only about the integration piece, but it's also about the next piece of this, the next step that we take with the data and how we leverage that long-term moving forward.
So one of the other ways that we think about the value proposition of standards and the community building those standards is really about future proofing. And Kelly touched on this as well, that idea that, well, really future proofing can be thought of as two different elements. One is by creating a scalable, agile framework. You are reducing vendor lock-in. You're allowing yourself to really focus your thoughts around your ecosystem and the decisions you're making around your digital ecosystem on what is the right solution for my teaching and learning needs, not what most easily fits into my my architecture or is going to be easiest to integrate. The creation of a plug and play architecture means you really can focus on the solution itself, how well it meets your requirements, and how well it fits within the larger set of requirements that you have. The other thing that future proofing really kind of entails or encapsulates is that enablement of innovation by creating a framework where integration and interoperability are simply a given and are part of the overall architecture and the overall topology of your system on campus. You're able to focus on solutions that may be newer or coming down the road that are addressing newly identified needs, that are addressing changes in pedagogy, that are addressing changes in assessment, the CLR, for example. And also the use of standards in the digital ecosystem like this is actually enabling suppliers to be innovative and be able to begin offering new solutions that they might not otherwise have been able to offer because they didn't have access to the kinds of data in a meaningful way that would allow them to develop new solutions and really enter new spaces within the education landscape. So again, the CLR is a really good example. I mentioned EduAPI earlier, and its goal of exposing the information in the student information system. There is a lot of pieces in the digital ecosystem on campus that need that information, that want that information, not only for existing solutions, but to provide new, we talked about integration with CRM and CRM type solutions, for example. And Caliper is another good example where being able to start to take advantage of the emerging learning analytics landscape, the solutions that are starting to appear out there as our grasp of learning analytics becomes firmer, and as some standardized solutions and ways of thinking about that data appear. So again, in the interest of kind of letting you hear from your colleagues, wanted to share some information from Mark McConaughey.
Hi, I'm Mark McConaughey. I'm the Associate Vice Provost and Registrar at Indiana University in Bloomington. And I was first introduced to IMS Global at an EDUCAUSE conference. I saw the power that IMS offered in terms of bridging multiple platforms to universities and their, particularly in the learning management world. And I was really very impressed. Well, later, I also began to have roles in ACRO, the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers. And I became very engaged in the development of what we called then the extended transcript. This was an idea that we could do a lot more with an academic record of an individual student and express their learning not only in terms of what they encountered as part of their academic experience, but also the other kinds of experiences that they were learning outside the classroom. We could capture those, validate those, and express them on behalf of the student. Later, this kind of expression of a learning record became the comprehensive learner record. Our immediate need was that we needed to do a better job of onboarding students, particularly during their first year, and to make them aware of all the engagements, all the possibilities, all the assets and values of Indiana University in Bloomington that they may not otherwise do. And we wanted to offer incentives and basically some assessments for how they might leverage these kinds of assets of the institution that they might not otherwise come into contact with. As a result, we created something called the Hoosier Experience Certificate. This was a whole program expressed across 4 different major criteria. First was academics and careers, arts and humanities, equity and inclusion, and community and engagement. Each one of these would either be an activity or an engagement. Most would have some sort of validation. Actually, they would all have validation, but all would have basically assessments associated with them to assure ourselves that in fact, the learning that was intended could be achieved through those particular assets. If a student completed 6 of these, they in fact earned a certificate. That was the incentive for trying to basically go across all these 4 areas and earn such a thing. And as a result, basically become much more engaged and knowledgeable about Indiana University in Bloomington. So we did it. And we expressed this particular certificate as a digital credential, much like a badge, but we wanted it to be trusted and validated like a transcript. In other words, we've had hundreds of years of trust in a credential that is a transcript. We wanted to carry the same kind of weight if we possibly could with this kind of credential, recognizing that the authority of that credential might be a little different. Well, our membership in IMS Global made all of this happen. First, because we were members, we were aware that IMS Global had developed a CLR standard based on some of the badge work they had done previously. Thus, it looked like a great candidate to use as the foundation of our transmission to our vendors and to potentially other third parties. In addition, if we use this kind of standard, we could create all kinds of things, particularly as we needed them as part of the institution, put them in the same foundation and transmit them without a lot of overhead and without creating a work of art for each certificate that we created. That's number one. That was the first value. The second value was, as we went about putting our data and mapping it into the standard, we needed some expertise. And as members of IMS Global, we were able to tap that knowledge and expertise of the organization, and that enabled us to implement what we did, our Hoosier certificate, very easily. And thus, I think the value of membership really relies on not only the overall mission of the organization, but the ability to tap knowledgeable individuals who can help you achieve your goals.
Wanted to present a slightly different perspective, or at least a different type of school, and that is Glenn Atchison at Hutchinson Community College. It's a great example of a school. It's not a big R1. They don't have a massive IT department, but what they have is the same sorts of needs and a vision of how to achieve those needs. In fact, one of the reasons that I was really excited about Glenn participating in IMS is because they specifically joined IMS to participate in EduAPI precisely because this was a problem they were trying to solve, and they were trying to solve it on their own on their campus. And they heard about EduAPI, realized not only were they trying to solve the exact same problem, but they could come and do it in the context of an industry standard that would provide them with a great deal more flexibility and more support overall.
I'm Glenn Atchison. I've been with Hutchinson Community College for 18 years and have worked in IT for over 20 years. At HCC, we're in a constant cycle of upgrading or replacing systems with best-of-breed software that will either be developed in-house or purchased and integrated. The key to this innovative approach is having a robust API architecture. EduAPI will help HCC in this goal by standardizing the API and the integrations to allow for quicker, more reliable integrations over time. It'll also provide a more flexible environment so that we can choose the best product to fit the needs for the college. HCC, we believe in open API architectures, and we believe that services can and should be integrated in a real-time fashion, or as close to real-time as possible. And we believe that EduAPI can help significantly in this endeavor because this integration approach of using APIs is great. The RESTful API architecture has given us a whole new access to tools and services that don't have to live within our data center, that can live anywhere in the world. But the challenge is that if each new system that we integrate has its own integration specifications that have to be maintained and updated as new releases come out, that is very labor intensive. And so by standardizing this approach, this modern open API architecture approach, that will greatly reduce the amount of time that we have to spend on updating and maintaining integrations as software changes over time. Having standards is extremely important to be able to communicate to software companies as to what our expectations are with regards to integration. And so you could cite a variety of different standards, such as accessibility standards, such as security standards. And so this is just taking that to the next step with integration standards to make sure that this exchange of data, which is critical to both the operation, but also to the security and privacy of the platform, that is done in an efficient and safe manner.
And the last feature or focus we want to share about how being a part of IMS and really leveraging standards can help your institution and the power of the community is really around saving money and time. As I'm sure it's not a surprise to all of you, you're all in this point where if you can save money and time, that's a win at this point. So talking a little bit about that is really the efficiency that we can find. So looking at how we can level the playing field, whether you're a small institution, a large institution, or an entire system, to look at how can we do this. So looking at how using those, as Glenn said, or as you'll hear next from Paul, leveraging those industry standards allows you to save time to not have to do that custom development work that comes when there's either an upgrade or a new product or a change in something. So making sure that you can take your resources from essentially maintenance and doing that custom work to be able to allow them to focus on those innovative projects. It allows you to get those digital resources in the hands of teachers and learners when you need them. So those integrations allow you to get that set up quickly and make it work the first time and every time. So you don't have to go back and go, oh, that didn't work today. Let's redo that. You don't have to worry about having those conversations. So really leveraging those certified products that we mentioned, making sure that your products are certified makes that implementation seamless. I know I've heard stories of people who've used set up integrations that are compliant or meet the standard but aren't certified that have taken months to get in place. You know, between the process of going through all the security background and the vetting that your institution requires, plus then setting up the integration and realizing, oh yeah, there's also this custom work we have to do. It can take a long time to get that tool in place. Where if you're leveraging the standards, I've seen that integration happen within a matter of days, which is really crucial as we have to respond to the changing needs of our institutions. Also, leveraging standards allows you to avoid being locked into your solutions. It gives you flexibility to be able to develop your product, develop your teaching and learning environment, develop your ecosystem in a way that works for you and allows you to be able to change and plug in different products as needed. And then as far as sharing time, anytime you have to do something that another institution has to do, why are we making you recreate the wheel or duplicate that effort? So looking at those community resources like the data privacy work and accessibility, if we can at least offload part of that review process for you, that's really going to save you time and money. So those are some highlights of some of the efficiencies we can really help you with. But to hear a little bit more, we'll turn to Paul to share his perspective.
Hi, my name is Paul Zarapata. My normal day job is as Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Kentucky Community and Technical College System. However, right now I'm serving as Interim System President, so getting some new perspectives. Some of the most important things about IMS and why they're really important, particularly to smaller institutions like community and technical colleges with limited IT staff, there's really 5 things that I've got on my elevator speech. One is that, why should you care about IMS global standards and standards in general? One is they're strategic and relevant. 2 is that there's resource savings involved. And the third one that's really the most important for a smaller institution is the institutional agility and the power of choice. When you have standards in place, integrations become easier. You can go with best of breed instead of having a vendor lock-in. Next item I'll say is risk reduction. When you have standards in place, you're reducing risk. And then member collaboration, the ability for IMS to bring together, whether it be through forums or online meetings or face-to-face, once we get back to face-to-face, it's just invaluable. I'm going to focus on the institutional agility and the power of choice. So what do you get out of that? You get a shorter implementation time. It doesn't take as long. It saves you money because you don't have your developers reinventing the wheel every time a new integration comes up. You get to shift your focus from custom wiring to innovation. You can put those people in more innovative roles than working on these integrations. You can adopt new platforms and technologies when you need them. And you can get away, as I mentioned earlier, from vendor lock-in on proprietary monolithic stacks. You can get best of breed because it's more feasible, particularly when you've got very limited resources. It also levels the playing field. I like to think of David and Goliath and the slingshot being IMS. You can compete with the large institutions out there and IMS can be your slingshot. Lastly, the common sets of data exchange standards free up more resources that can be focused on teaching and learning. That's just a few of the reasons why IMS is really important.
So you've heard us talk a lot today and use the word community a lot and the word collaboration. And that's because that really is the heart and soul of IMS. It's easy to talk about technical standards and specifications and the outcomes of the work that the IMS community does, because that's very, very important. But it's easy to lose sight of the fact of how all of that comes to be. And that comes to be through the power of community. IMS does not create and dictate standards and push them out and force people to adopt them or anything of that nature. It's those standards and those specifications and all of the outcomes from IMS, whether it's best practices or white papers, et cetera, those come about through the work of the members of IMS. We are a community, and the work is the product of that community. It's about participation, collaboration, leading to innovation. This is the peer set. This is your peers. This is the IMS higher education community. And like we've been saying, it really does span the spectrum of higher education institutions and the higher education world, from large-scale state systems with hundreds of thousands of students to small technical and community colleges. Everybody can participate, everybody has a voice, everybody can contribute. And that's what we want, hopefully, from you. We want you to get involved precisely because of that. Without your involvement, IMS really, for all intents and purposes, doesn't exist. It certainly isn't successful. We do have membership, a membership fit for every type of institution, from small institutions to large institutions. And we have the ability to participate in a way that makes sense for you and your particular needs. We have some institutions that really just want access to the resources and to sort of be a fly on the wall, to be in listen mode in meetings. And then we have some institutions that really want to get in there. They want to contribute. They want to be a key part of development of solutions and development of best practices, and even take leadership roles. So we have everything in IMS from our innovation leadership networks, which are our institutional bodies that identify and address strategic level concerns in the industry and start to define the requirements about how those concerns can be addressed. We have our project groups and task forces, which is where the rubber meets the road. Those are the groups that actually take those requirements coming out of ILNs and from other sources and develop solutions to address those needs. Again, whether that's a specification and standard or whether that's a best practices paper, et cetera. And then we have those leadership opportunities. We have our higher education institutional leadership board that really sets the agenda for the IMS community in the higher ed space, as well as things like our technical advisory board, which is tasked with reviewing and approving all of the technical specifications that come out of IMS. So any of those things, all of those things that you might want to be involved in, you potentially can be. And I know we've thrown an enormous amount of information at you. I see we're coming in just under the wire. So we do want to open it up to questions, but in the meantime as well, if you have questions or if you are interested in taking a deeper dive into any of the topics either that we've addressed here or that you go out and take a look at the IMS website, please don't hesitate to reach out to Kelly and I, and we would be happy to answer or address anything that we can. Thank you all very much for joining us. Again, we know what your time is like these days. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and we hope to talk to all of you soon. In the meantime, have a wonderful end of the semester, end of the session, holiday season, Happy New Year, and take care, everyone. Thank you.